Okay, Luke, we're going to go over pan-searing ribeyes today. You need to be able to cook a steak for yourself and maybe a young lady that you could impress. First thing is, you're not always going to have a grill, so you need to learn to do a good sear in a cast iron pan. So you can use cast iron pan is the best pan. It's going to give you a really good dark crust on the outside of your steak. You want to have your pan on a medium-high heat, starting to smoke a little bit. Once it starts to get really hot, about 5 minutes on the heat, you're going to add neutral cooking oil, olive oil or avocado oil. Avocado oil is a little better because it is a higher smoke point, so it can take the heat a little better. You can see that the oil is already starting to really run in the pan and is good and hot. We'll give it a little more time while we're getting that oil warmed up. We're going to season our steak. And I prefer to take your steak out about 30 minutes before you cook it. And at that time you can season it so the salt will actually dissolve into the meat and start to flavor the steak from the inside out. We were putting kids to bed, so we didn't get that chance yet. You season your steak. Good beef is only going to take salt. Ribeyes are really well marbled, so you're getting a lot of flavor from the fat that's in the steak. Fat is flavor. When you have good marbling in your steak, it's going to taste really good. You can see the smoke starting to come up. I get the oil around the pan, so you know it's good and hot. Spread the oil so it doesn't just collect on the sides, but it'll go in the middle of the pan. Looking for a real good hot pan so you can get a crust on the outside of your steak. If you don't hear that sizzle, then there's something wrong. Now we're gonna gently press on the steak to make sure all the meat's in contact with the pan. Cold steak just hit the hot pan, so it's going to take the temperature down from the pan, so you can even turn your temperature up a little bit. And you don't want to do a lot to it if you're trying to get a good sear, a good crust. The other thing I did was to make sure the meat was really dry. So if there's any moisture from packaging or from your fridge, that water, the moisture on the steak is going to steam your steak instead of searing it with a crust. So you want to make sure it's really dry before you put it in the pan. These ribeyes are kind of thin, so we're going to look at it, see how it does after about 2 minutes on the sear. All right, about 2 minutes in, we're going to shake the pan a little, see if its meat is going to release itself. Once you get a good sear, it'll actually release from the pan itself. We'll take a peek. Look at that good crust we got. We're going high heat and a little shorter time on that really high heat so we can get a crust. That brown crust is the Maillard reaction, brings out the natural sugars and gives a really great flavor on the outside of the steak. We just don't want to cook it too much on the inside. That's a danger getting thin steaks. Just going to get the oil around the pan a little bit. Give it another minute and a half. Try to get a good crust on the outside of that second side. And then we're going to baste it with a little bit of butter. When you pan sear a steak, you can also use aromatics like garlic or rosemary. which you wouldn't be able to do on the grill. You're not always going to have a grill too. If you're, well, I guess if you're at home, you use your dad's. But you're always going to have a pan around, so you can always cook a nice piece of protein. Pretty good sear on that side. So now we're going to if this were a gas stove, we turn it to just real low gas. So I'm going to turn the electric off altogether. Just let that burner cool down a little bit. I don't want to overcook the steak. Get another good little bit of sear on the second side so you get good, even brown crust all throughout the whole steak. As that's getting cold, you can take whole garlic, cloves, take the knife, and just bust up your garlic a little bit. You can even leave the skin on for when you're basting with butter. I'll take the loose stuff off. What we're doing here is releasing the oil of the garlic, so you're going to get a lot of flavor. And then we're going to put the pan back on a little bit of heat. A little bit of butter. A couple of knobs, then we put the garlic in with the butter. That's still a little hot. You just want the garlic and the butter to foam up a little bit.
Got me.
Sorry, Shelley. And then all we're going to do is put the garlic on the steak. And baste the steak with that garlic and that butter. The oil from the garlic starting to release and give some good natural flavor all over the steak. You can smell it right now. It smells really good. The butter gets brown and a little nutty as it starts to caramelize the sugars in the butter. Watch out for the garlic skin. See how the butter's turned brown now? You could baste this steak for as long as you want. It's just going to give it more and more flavor. You don't need to do it a ton. This works a lot better with a gas stove because the gas heat will keep the butter browning and warm. But we're basically on low heat. So you finish the cook on the ribeye, on the steak. As you're basting the hot butter over, it's going to carry over cook. Taking all that flavor throughout the fat of the butter and the fat of the steak, and that fat renders and then transports the flavor in the pan onto the steak. Fat is flavor. So if you have a ribeye, you've got a ton of fat, so all I did was season this with salt. You don't need a lot of other fancy ingredients or anything with a ribeye. If you're going to cook a sirloin or a tenderloin, a filet, then you might want to make some sort of other sauce for your steak, or use a butter sauce, a beurre blanc, or a béarnaise. Because it's so lean, it's not going to have a lot of flavor. Just into As your steak is finishing its cook, anytime you cook a piece of protein, it gets really hot, the protein seizes up, gets really constricted because of all that heat. So after you cook it, you want to let it rest before you cut into it. Just like a Thanksgiving turkey, you don't want to cut it right away, otherwise all the juice that's on the inside of the steak is going to come spurting out and you're left with a dry piece of steak. No bueno. Let the garlic stay in the butter and get flavorful. Now at this point you can, this steak was pretty thin, it's pretty cooked past where I like to have it, but you're getting so much flavor from the fat and the butter that it's okay. And we're going to put it on these forks so it has a little bit of air between the steak and the plate or the cutting board, whatever you put it on. So then we just cooked that for about 8 minutes. So we're going to let it rest for at least half the amount of time that we cooked it. So about 4 minutes, we're going to let it rest and then we'll cut into it and eat it. All right, do we rest the steak? On that side. The most delicious portion of ribeye is this exterior part on the outside of the fat cap. Call that the decal. You can slice through the fat if you like and steal that because you cooked right in there. It's the best piece. In this steak, you can see, we'll just cut the rest. Save that by for Shelly. Pretty overdone because it's a little thin steak from Kroger, but if you get a thicker steak, ribeye is still nice and flavorful because it's so full of flavor and fat and we basted. So you can cook it on the grill outside and it's going to be a little more, not quite as overcooked, but we'll try this guy. It's just salt and beef, a little bit of garlic and butter. You don't even have to do the basting part. You could just cook this in the pan without basting. It'll be less cooked, less overdone, and still have a ton of flavor. This is a little Kroger steak for like, I think we got these for like $10 per steak with the way it was packaged and on sale. So if you can, go to your butcher, get a good thick steak. You can cook it in the pan or obviously just on the grill. And the best part is the steak sauce that's left in the pan is a little garlic butter that you can spread over too. These garlic bits are delicious. You can eat those. And then if you really would like to impress someone, you can make a pan sauce out of what was left from your saute pan. So the good thing about cooking in a cast iron pan is all that stuff that was seared off is bits of the beef and everything that's stuck to the pan. Turn your pan back on high and you can use wine to deglaze the pan. We're gonna wait till that gets a little hot because we were interrupted by children in the pan. Right after you do this, take the steak off, let it rest, and you can make your pan sauce right after you take your steak off the heat. Turn it back to high. And then you're gonna put a little bit of wine. When you put the wine in there, it's gonna release all the stuff that's on the bottom of the pan. And cook off the alcohol from the wine. And then it'll thicken up and you can use that as steak sauce as well. If you ever put A1 on your steak, then you ain't doing it right because you can make your steak sauce right here. You don't have to buy any steak sauce. see the wine start to bubble and sizzle. It's going to go to work and getting all the flavor off the bottom of the pan. Ooh, that smells good. You can see now there's, you can smell the garlic and the butter coming off the bottom of the pan, the beef, obviously all the protein, a little bit of salt. And you can try to waft that up and smell it. If you still smell the alcohol, you need to let it cook off a little more. But this is pretty good, it's getting thick. You can see the bottom of the pan is pretty clean. And that sauce is getting so thick. Typically, I'd have the steak on a plate, not just on the cutting board. And then you can pour this sauce right over the plate. Give it a little more heat to get it nice and thick. And then that's your steak sauce. Also helps with cleanup because now your pan's clean.